All right, good afternoon, friends. We have a few stalwarts here who are hanging with us late in the afternoon on the last day of this great professional development forum. And I'd like to welcome those of you who are here and thank you for joining us for this opportunity to discuss our total Army aviation team in the context of readiness. Again, as a quick reminder, most of you probably already know this, but roughly half of our Army aviation team resides in our reserve component. Very relevant, in high demand, and we're going to get an opportunity to take a look at readiness across our total force today. The panel that we'll have to discuss this consists of Brigadier General Ray Davis, and I may mess up the title here, but Special Assistant to the Director of the Army Guard for Aviation and Safety, Colonel Joe Bishop, Army National Guard Director of Aviation, and recent commander of our Army Aviation Unit of the Year, the 449th Theater Aviation Command. Incredible accomplishment, great deployment by a magnificent team there, a lot to be proud of. We're also joined by Brigadier General Jami Shawley, who's commander of Army Reserve Aviation Command, and then Colonel Ron Els, commander of 1st Army's recently reconstituted 166th Aviation Training Brigade, key partner in our total Army aviation readiness team. I'm Erik Peterson. I'm the commander of Division West of 1st Army and a proud partner of readiness with our Army National Guard and U.S. Army Reserve. I would like to take an opportunity to introduce one other teammate, Brian. I'm going to put you on the spot real quick. Would you mind standing up? CW5 Brian Fontenot, recent addition to the Division West and 1st Army team, courtesy Alabama Army National Guard, and he's going to be our Command Chief Warrant Officer and bring some aviation rigor and some total team sense into our headquarters. We really appreciate having you come on board there. We're going to begin with some brief presentations from our total Army aviation teammates, and we'll begin with the Army National Guard team.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank Quad A for the opportunity to come and share the Army National Guard message as part of the total Army team. And I'll tell you up front, the team is very solid. There's great synergy and just the overall communication, transparency, and working together to solve a lot of the challenges. Some of them are quite large, but we're working together as a total Army to achieve a common end. Next slide, please. Just a little overview of who we are. The Army National Guard, like General Peterson said, we make up almost half of the Army aviation enterprise, and we have a total of 18 brigades, 55 flight battalions, which equates to about 30,000 aviation professionals, almost 1,500 aircraft, and at any given day we're supporting Army requirements and combatant commander requirements across the globe. We have operation. We've supported a CAB deployment in Kuwait and Iraq for the last probably about 13 years. We support operations in Europe and Kosovo, and we provide a battalion plus in support of operations in Afghanistan. We've recently added some additional Homeland Security missions, and we also provide brigade support to NORTHCOM for that Homeland Security role. We have ongoing operations domestically, southwest border. So our Guard's not idle. We are employed, and we're making a lot of great things happen for our nation. Next slide, please. A little bit about our modernization strategy, and we want to be, an interoperable, sustainable yet affordable option, for our nation, and we do that with very dedicated team of guardsmen that we're primarily MDay, our part-time soldiers that come in and they do amazing work, and they maintain that balance between a civilian career, having a family, and also supporting our military. And my hat's off to them and what they do every day as part of the team. With regards to working through modernization challenges, I can tell you sitting here today, there is no daylight between the Army National Guard and Compo 1, Active Army, and how we're solving those problems. The Guard is an active participant in these discussions and a key player in ensuring that we have the right mix of force structure and we balance today's requirements versus the modernization that I'm sure a lot of you have heard a lot about over the last couple of days. Next slide, please. And this slide just has pictures of some of our professionals kind of highlighting what we do. In addition to maintaining the MTO structure, forces that are ready to deploy, we also operate 4 training sites for the aviation enterprise. They're an extension of Fort Rucker, and they specialize in fixed wing support, high altitude training, and then the EATS and WATS provide the aircraft support and training for LUH, for Chinook, and Black Hawk. Think of them as an extension of Fort Rucker. It provides additional surge capacity, and it helps meet the training requirements, not only for the Guard, but for the total Army. And I wanted to also talk about, in addition to providing support for the warfight, we also provide support on the home front. But our primary focus is training and making ready these forces for the warfight, but that in turn makes us responsive to our governors and the states which these formations reside. Just a couple of stats from FY18, we flew over 5,400 hours, 1,100 missions involving over 1,400 aircraft. You support of floods, wildfires, hurricanes, medevac, and search and rescue missions. FY19 has been much different. We're off to a big start, more than 800 hours, 134 missions involving 182 aircraft. Most recently, we responded to the floods in Nebraska. Thus far, there's been 129 missions, 116 rescues. 66 of these were hoist rescues, many of which were conducted under NVG. So the years past, you really didn't hear about that a lot, but there would be 1 or 2 rescues like that. But here recently, with a lot of flooding, we've done an awful lot of these live hoist rescues, and it's a great capacity or capability we provide our nation, but it makes us ready for the war fight, but we're there on both fronts. We're ready to deploy when required, to go overseas somewhere, but we're also right here, in our own backyards, ready to respond and support the nation. A couple of other things we provided during the Nebraska response, 3.3 million pounds of sandbags were employed. The 1,100 pound, these big sandbags were dropped in with Chinooks. 82 hay bales, 2,500 pounds each. As the flood borders came up, a lot of livestock were isolated. Chinooks were brought in, and they were dropping these off, ensuring that just an example of the unique mission sets that we can be called to at a moment's notice. With that, I'm going to pass the mic over to Colonel Joe Bishop.
Hey, thank you. So talking about readiness and how we tie into the total team in the support of that, General Davis obviously did a great job of that. He's my boss. I have to say that. But no, the important thing is we look at unit readiness over 2 years out. We NOS units, notification of sourcing, for these units over 2 years out so that they know where they're going, what they're doing, and they can prepare. But we also tie in with First Army at that same point. So we're doing readiness reviews of the units, and we're getting them prepared to go. As a brigade commander and deploying, I took over 13 different states with me. The challenge of that is the collective readiness to get to that point. So all the good things that we do individually in the state, coming together at our current resource and funding level at a platoon level proficiency, it becomes a challenge that we have to work together with First Army to make sure that we are ready to go above the platoon, company, battalion level on these deployments. So the challenges and the issues as we look at the units going forward, we've done a good job to this point of the experience of over the last 15 plus years, but we are continually working on the capabilities of resourcing the units to be prepared to go out the door and mobilize. If we can go to the next slide. Perfect. So again, this is just another example, some pictures of soldiers doing both at home and abroad and preparing for their future missions. One of the challenges when we talk about doing our domestic mission, we're doing that in lieu of doing other training. So it comes from the same funding and resourcing in a large part. All good things, everything, when you get to get a blade hour, it is good resources. But what I say is, we continually have to work on making sure that we are trained and ready for the war fight. And that, again, the interconnected tissue with us and First Army is important in that process. So with that, sir, thank you.
All right, thanks. Okay, next on to our U.S. Army Reserve Aviation Command and Brigadier Jami Shawley.
Thank you, sir. I echo General Davis's thanks to Quad A. We really appreciate the opportunity to really truly talk about the total team up here. We often hear in the political dialogue the seams between the components, but what you seldom hear, I think, is the good news story of how we've melded the seams, certainly over recent years. And through the warfight in the last 17 and 18 years, we've all fought together. You will often hear active component commanders come back and say, I didn't really understand the Guard and Reserve till we deployed together, and they say great things about the team, but really at Force Generation, we are coming together, we have come together as a team. It truly is total team Army. So I'm happy to talk about Army Reserve Aviation. It's only about 10% of the aviation force, but with a little over 4,000 soldiers, we operate with 9.5% full-time soldiers. So much like the Army National Guard, we are a economic way to maintain aviation readiness. We do capture a lot of the active component soldiers that come off of active component, go pursue their civilian careers, but they want to maintain their ties to Army aviation and be ready when they're called upon. And so one of the ways we do that in the reserve components is to follow the readiness model, right? So we have a 1 to 4 readiness availability in years. Every fifth year, our soldiers expect to deploy on cycle based on historical requirements. The Army Reserve has 2 of the 10 reserve component cabs, so that helps us to have a predictable cycle for our cabs. We are in the middle of deploying the 244th ECAB out of Fort Hood right now. I think they've had 5 of 8 main body Strat Air flights, I think have already landed. There's another one going out maybe tonight. So, and then I've got another cab, 11th ECAB, sitting in Colorado that can anticipate being on a somewhat regularized deployment schedule. We have over 1,000 civilian employees, and one of the ways that the reserve component is significantly different from the active component is our reliance on our aviation support facilities to maintain and sustain our fleets when they're at home. So this is a way that we can operate economically, and interestingly, we tend to have higher OR rates consistently every year. And that is a testament to our soldiers who work both as civilians in the support facilities and on weekends come in and put their uniform on to fulfill their reserve component obligations. So the very small numbers that the Reserve Compo 3 brings to the aviation fight also include more than 40% of the non-executive fixed-wing fleet. So we're deeply invested in the future of fixed-wing aviation. We actually had a good session with General McConville a little earlier today, and there were some questions from the audience. The reserve component is heavily invested across the board in our utility fixed-wing. So that's a discussion for us that's near and dear in the modernization realm. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick overview of where we are in the Army Reserve. While the Guard has aviation in every single state, they do function in a Title 32 role, and so they have some state obligations. And the one thing that we have uniquely in Compo 3 is that all of those units report to me. So any place in the country that there's a need for aviation, I personally have the ability to flex some assets depending on what the requirement is. So that's something that we can help bring to the fight, particularly when we talk about hurricanes, floods, emergencies in the homeland. So we have an ability to respond in total across the United States, not restricted by state boundaries. Next slide, please. So here's some of the unique things about the Army Reserve: strengths, weaknesses, right? We have a lot of the weaknesses are our small full-time support, but some of the initiatives we're getting after, like every component, our readiness. We hear the chief's words loud and clear, and the secretary's words loud and clear, and we're really hitting the readiness rates. We've reduced our non-deployables by 12% just in Army Reserve Aviation over the last 3 years. We're increasing survivability initiatives. We're really working closely with Fort Rucker and Mr. Van Meter on how we improve our tactics, techniques, and procedures and really get back to tactical flying in a contested environment. And then recruiting and retention like everyone else. Our personnel, our recruiting is the key to success for the future fight. If you look up in the top right quadrant, you see the operations. These are operations and exercises that the one brigade we have at home this summer will participate in. So Northern Strike is an opportunity for collective training with the Compo 2 soldiers. Operation Cold Steel is an Army Reserve initiative to get after crew-served weapons, soldier skills that require some training sets, training resources that we don't have sitting at every reserve base. You'll see Prominent Hunt and Vibrant Response are our defense of the homeland. And then we're also flying fixed wing in support of UCOM and in support of Indo-PACOM. And so I think sometimes in this community we're really rotary wing centric and we lose sight of the fact that the real requirement for our fixed wing is theater support. It moves our Army commanders and their priority requirements around the intra-theater circulation when needed and where needed, which is something that we haven't always had available to us from the other services. So I'm happy to see that we've had an opportunity to really get over to the COCOMs and exercise that. Some of the strengths we bring to the table are our individual crew proficiencies, and we share this with the Guard. We just have a tremendous amount of experienced, skilled individual aviators. But one of the weaknesses that comes with that is the limited opportunity for collective training. So if I can go to the next slide, please. So I just talked about the 244th ECAB and their ability to get out the door. If you see the multi-compo nature of that organization, we deployed the brigade headquarters as a reserve component headquarters, an assault battalion, a general support battalion, and minus 5th of the 159th, almost in total. Our assault battalion is Lima Battalion, so we took the headquarters, part of Delta Company, part of Echo Company, and the assault companies are filled in with National Guard units, in addition to a National Guard ASB, and then we plugged in with active component attack assets that are already in theater. So this is a true total force, multi-component, 1,400 soldier deployment that's in the process of going out the door. And that's my transition slide because really the 166th recently reconstituted, cue the mic for Ron Els almost, were absolutely critical. They're really imperative in getting this exceedingly complicated organization out the door successfully. But they really did get out successfully. Some of the statistics are pretty impressive. These are post-mobilization numbers. So this is at North Fort Hood. They flew 2,400 hours. They only drove 7 convoys, but with 4,233 miles. They transported 20,000 pounds of cargo, pumped 170,000 gallons of fuel. I don't even want to read off all the weapons qualifications because Ron's mad about how much we burned up the range, but we qualified every crew there and walked out the door with 97% RL1 crew qualification. So while we had some concerns coming in about our ability to train collectively in post-mob, the unit really got after it with the assistance of the 166. They're really vital to the reserve component's ability to get out the door as an effective, collectively trained team. I appreciate what they did, but I appreciate what that team did as well. They came together as a team. There were no component seams at North Fort Hood. When I went to visit that team, and I visited 4 times, I could not have told you who were the Guard soldiers, who were the reserve soldiers, total team fight. So I really want to emphasize that as my last talking point, that this panel is really important you see us here together. This is the way we train, this is the way we fight. Thank you.
All right, next we have Colonel Ron Els, who has recently and successfully stood up and reconstituted the 166th Aviation Training Brigade, bringing our total Army partnership capacity back to 1st Army.
Thanks, sir. Ma'am, thanks for the kind words. Like the rest of the members on the panel, it's a big honor to be here today and talk about what we're doing in support of the entire aviation enterprise. So I'll run through a few slides to talk about what we've done. As the unit was shut down in 2015, it passed through a couple hands as battalion commanders doing the mission that I'm now doing as a brigade commander. One of them sitting out here, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hay, if you'll raise your hand, did an outstanding job doing everything I'm about to describe with about 1/3 of the folks that I'm authorized. So hats off to you. You set the stage very well for us to stand the brigade back up. Next slide, please. This is just a mission, and I won't go into it, but 3 key parts. The first one that's highlighted there is executing the pre- and post-mobilization training and validation of all the reserve component aviation units going out the door. The second one is to help promote the U.S. Army total force integration through engagement and assistance with our active duty partners out there in the cabs, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then the last one that I didn't highlight is providing mission command over the Royal Netherlands Air Force 302nd Dutch Training Squadron. So they have 8 Apaches and 4 Chinooks. They've been on North Fort Hood for about, since 1996. So another one of my red-headed stepchildren that's in our formation. Next slide, please. So here's our wiring diagram. It's a pretty decent economy of force mission. The 2 battalions that you see in blue are 81-person battalions, 66 personnel up in my brigade headquarters. The 2 battalions are almost similar. If you look at the bottom row, you'll see the differences that I'm talking to the boss about equalizing those so they're exactly the same. But there's 6 observer controller trainer teams that focus on, as you can see there, UH-60, CH-47, the AVUM, the Forward Support Company, and the differences in the bottom row. My 2nd battalion has 1 medevac OCT team and 1 air traffic services OCT team. 3rd battalion has 2 med. So I'm going to equalize those so that we're more responsive and more flexible, especially if there's a contingency that comes up that asks us to increase our throughput at the MFGI. And then I won't get into the center, but that's where my 302nd Dutch Squadron resides. Next slide, please. Some of this was already stated, so I'm not going to restate it, but obviously, depending if you count the people, the machines, or the organizations, roughly 50% of the Army resides in the reserve component. About 45% of the rotary wing that's in CENTCOM is a reserve component and obviously flows through 1st Army, Div West, North Fort Hood to get them ready to go out the door. The third one, as General Shawley just talked about, every 8 months, 1,400 soldiers from, as Joe said, 10 to 15 different states cross the cattle guard at North Fort Hood, and 53 days later we put them on some strat air and send them downrange, sometimes with some of their equipment in terms of airframes, depending on what the theater needs are. But that's a pretty tall order for any cab to come together and do that. Won't hit the 10 to 15 states, we already said that. And the biggest thing, probably the second from the bottom that's highlighted in blue, is the pre-deployment engagement. And as we stand the brigade up and stand up a sister battalion to what Marcus had before, the intent is to get left of boom as far as we can, and boom being the Mobilization Training Center Arrival Date, or MTCAD. If I can get more quantity and more quality engagements pre-mobilization with those units at their sites, at their support facilities, during their drill, then that's how we can build and monitor readiness before they come to us, and we can make the 53 days we have more valuable in terms of building true collective readiness and validating that. So that's really my goal to my team, and my charter that I've got from General Peterson is get far left as you can as soon as they're NOSed, as Joe mentioned earlier, notified of sourcing. We're tied to the hip with them through an ELK cycle and having multiple touch points, and we'll refine that a little bit based on some lessons learned of the last 2 cabs that we've done since I've been in command. And then the bottom one, and you'll see the chart here in a minute, but we all own a piece of total Army aviation, and that's why we're all sitting up here together. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Just a pictorial diagram of the missions that we're doing out there. If you start from the bottom in the orange, that's our largest effort. So a cab, again, 1,400 folks, aggregated 10 to 15 different states, train them for 53 days, send them downrange to 5 different countries, anywhere from 13 to 16 operating locations. Pretty robust task. They bring, again, 1,400 soldiers to North Fort Hood and 61 aircraft as training equipment set, along with their fuelers, trucks, and all that. And that's how we get after it. So they're borrowing equipment from their sister units. We run them through the paces. If you go to the right to Afghanistan, as everyone knows, the mission set there is changing a little bit. So every 2 years we'll do a Armed Reconnaissance Battalion. So there's one that just came back, and the next one will be December 20 timeframe. In between those rotations is a medevac and a Chinook detachment. Ends up being about 35 aircraft at North Fort Hood and about 250 folks. Go up to the farthest north to Kosovo. That's one of our smallest aviation-related ones. about 200 folks, 9 aircraft, and in Kosovo, they're the only medevac that's there. So 3 of those birds are medevac, and the other 6 are essentially an ARF that moves around it. Right now, it's a Turkish infantry company. It's a quick reaction force. Not reflected on here, we do home station mobilization for a theater aviation support maintenance group, or a TASMJU, and we do that in concert with our partners in AMCOM. So 4 major mission sets. In the gray blowout box is our way of trying to replicate the very challenging distributed mission command that they will handle downrange. Recently just had a signed memorandum of agreement with Fort Sill. We put a battalion task force there when we have a cab on the ground, and that partnership has been very, very successful. So next slide, please. So how do we help them get after all those missions? Well, FORSCOM's done a couple of things, and you'll see them in the next 2 or 3 slides. So this is a partnership alignment, and I'll say right off the bat, as I saw Matt Weinschel look up there and say, "Oh my God, am I partnered with 2 cabs?" Really, this was a regionally aligned as best as they could to have the active component, and you'll see in the middle column, that's an active component cab, partnered with one of the reserve component cabs, and then on the far left-hand side of that is the 10 brigades within 1st Army. You notice 166 isn't on there. Well, we're partnered with almost all of these guys just through the normal life cycle. But this is how we get after just the normal GIF map, or global force management allocation process mission set. So this is steady state and really has nothing to do with the deployment side of the house. Where we run into rubs is General Shawley's team that just came through 244th. If you look at that on the 3rd line, is partnered with Matt Weinschel. Well, he's downrange in Afghanistan, and so they have to look at how can we partner with them for both augmentee OCTs as well as the Apaches that support their mobilization. And so FORSCOM looks at who's going to rip out and bring the Apaches in, and Lance Van Zant's team from 1ACB provided both the guest OCTs as well as the Apaches. If we can go to the next slide, this gets at when a unit is NOST, and the foundational, regulation, FORSCOM Regulation 220-2, that talks about the Army Total Force Policy and an associated directive that came down in 2016 that directs the active component cabs to put their arms around the reserve component mobilizing elements that are assigned to them. And it's pretty prescriptive in terms of the leadership. If you look at the bottom blue mark, a cab standardization instructor pilot or their AMSO at a minimum will participate in their deploying unit's culminating training event. Some success stories that we've had highlighted in bold are the ones that have in the last year since I've been there, but our partners from the 101st, 1ID, 1AD, and most recently 1ACB, helping us get after the pre-mob integration of the partners that will deploy downrange, and then also providing assistance during the post-mob training and validation. So pretty critical, and as I briefed the Aviation Pre-Command course, and as the boss let me speak to the Aviation Senior Leader Forum, really remind folks that this is out there, and to use the chart prior to it to educate them on who you're partnered with, and tee them off that, hey, your partner is deploying in 18 months, your partner is deploying in 6 months, or your partner just got back and they're in the 1st year of the 5-year SRM cycle. So that's all there is on that one. And the next slide, I think, is the last slide. And this is what we've done with our partners up here on the stage. To get after true synchronization of what's happening. We copied some of the other working groups that are out there. In fact, we plagiarized the charter from the UAS working group and created the Reserve Component Mobilization Working Group. And you see the 4 executive committee members that are up there. Not on the stage is Colonel Jeff Becker, the FORSCOM G3 Aviation. But he, myself, Joe Bishop, and not on here is Lee Hyder from USARAC Aviation Watercraft Director. We all 4 signed that charter. We meet monthly in a telecon, and then at every one of the quarterly aviation sync meetings, we get together and we tee up ideas and issues that'll go to the Council of Colonel, and if it warrants it, we'll go to the General Officer Steering Committee. And this process alone has been instrumental, I think, in the last 6 to 8 months in getting some of these challenges aired out between all 3 of the components, and if necessary, elevated up to the 2- and 3-star level for solution. I believe that's my last slide, and we intentionally wanted to leave about a half hour for questions or discussions. So that's all I have for my piece.
Okay. Thanks, Ron. Appreciate that. And thanks, team, for your presentations. If anybody has any questions, we have a couple of mics up here in front. We'd welcome questions, comments, engagement from anyone. If you just wouldn't mind grabbing one of the mics there. Thank you.
Self-service. I'm very good at that. I'm a reporter.
Yeah.
Sidney Friedberg, Breaking Defense. You folks touched on this a bit, but on the materiel side, I know there's been a lot of back and forth with years, but there is an effort now to make sure that the newest equipment comes into the RC in some proportion, like 6-to-1 to what's coming to the active. It's not just cascaded down, you know, your big brother's outworn helicopter. You know, so where are you all in terms of getting Apache E, in terms of 60, I guess Victor is the version that you all are getting next, in terms of Chinook, I guess F Block 1, and also understand there's some plan to put the future long-range assault aircraft in some RC formations, and you know, to be determined on the future attack recon scout aircraft. So the extent that that's not, you know, that's known, where do you stand on getting a share of those modernization programs in the RC?
Okay, Sydney, I've got to defer to our components, teammates here. Let them speak for that.
Yeah, I'd like to address the Army National Guard piece of that. We'll start with the 64 Echo. The Army National Guard, in concert with the headquarters DA staff, we looked at several courses of action on how and when to field to all units, not just the Guard, but we're looking at both Compo 1 and 2. And the Army National Guard submitted a course of action that allowed us to continue to maintain the deployment cycle that we're on right now in support of operations in Afghanistan. That course of action was the one that was selected by senior Army leaders. So the Army Guard will field its first Echo Battalion in FY22, and about 4 years later, we should be completely fielded, 24 aircraft each battalion. So we're definitely not first in that lineup, but we certainly aren't last. So you know, I'd say that we got the fielding plan for when we needed it. So each of those 4 battalions that we currently have will go downrange with a Delta model, and then the next time they deploy, if the schedule holds, then they should go into theater as an Echo model battalion. You mentioned from 22 to 26 under the current plan for the Army Guard. 60 Victor, we're part of that as well. I think the Guard is planned to be one of the primary users of that airframe. We are a strong proponent of that program. We see great value in taking a Lima model analog aircraft, providing that digital, almost mic-like capability. And the more I learn about that aircraft, I'm impressed by it. If it does what we think it's going to do, it'll be better than Mike in a lot of ways. I've taken groups of state aviation officers to Huntsville on 2 occasions to look at the aircraft that's in development, to fly the simulator, talk to the leadership from the PM Utility Office, Colonel Jackson, Brigadier General Thomas Todd and his folks, and they've been very accommodating to our input. You know, I mentioned earlier that we are warfight ready to be governor responsive. They took a lot of our input while this aircraft was still in the development phase to allow us to add on some of the capabilities that we need for the domestic mission. When the aircraft comes off of the production line, it will be wired and plumbed for the additional equipment that we need. The airworthiness releases will have already been completed. So if we need to hang a hoist on that aircraft, put nose-mounted FLIR, civil band radios, 12-point ICS, the Victor model Black Hawk will come already set and ready to incorporate that capability. You mentioned CH-47 Block 1. The Army National Guard is completely fielded with CH-47 Block 1. So I think the average age of our aircraft are 8 years old. They're doing very well. That is one of our big demand units. We are just now getting to the point where our bog dwell is approaching 1 to 4. It was 1 to 2 point something for quite some time, a big demand signal on those aircraft. But we fielded a combination of cascaded aircraft from Compo 1 and new build aircraft coming off the factory line, and we did that intentionally to allow us to deploy CH-47F units. And the feedback I've gotten from talking to the maintainers and leaderships in the unit is that once they receive those cascaded aircraft and they incorporate it in our maintenance flow, you really can't tell the new build from the cascades. They're doing great, wonderful things with those aircraft, and they're also in big demand domestically. Wildfire operations, they've been used in Nebraska, as I mentioned. So it's a big component of our overall capability. And we're also maintaining, we're completely fielded, but we're also helping the Army maintain their operational readiness float in CH-47Fs. And then we have the UH-72 Lakota, 212 of those, we're completely fielded, and we're on track. And the Mike model, I'd say, was the one place we probably could have done a better job in how we fielded those aircraft. Beginning in FY22, all Mike models that are produced will go to the Army National Guard, and it's because everyone else has been fielded. I think that the total Army, we've looked at that and said, you know, we probably can do a better job with that. And I don't think that the Army Guard should be first in line for everything, but we certainly shouldn't be last. It really depends on the priority of the unit, when the unit's going downrange, the mission that's required of the unit should really drive where that new equipment goes first. So we're part of that discussion. We have a seat at that table, and we're working with the total Army to solve those tough challenges that are coming ahead.
Jami.
Yeah, so for the Army Reserve Compo 3, we are, likewise, we're all Fox model Chinooks, and I echo General Davis's comments that that's been a fantastic platform for us. The ORH show it, the capabilities show it, the teams love that aircraft, so that's been a really consistent, steady platform. So we have a mix of Lima and Mike model Blackhawks. Our assault battalions are both Lima Pure, so I have 2 combat aviation brigades minus attack assets. So we converted our Apache battalions to our assault battalions. So when my brigade goes out the door, I will always deploy a multi-compo brigade because we'll bring in the attack. So the Guard has the conversation about modernization of Apaches and what happens to the FARA, but we have a lift pure fleet at this time. The Lima model modernization is a pretty long-term schedule. The Guard doesn't have to be last, but somebody does. So we'll be at the tail end of the conversion. And you know, that remains to be seen. The distant future of Army aviation modernization will play out as industry continues to bring more dynamic solutions to the table, and we'll see what FAR ends up looking like and what our force structure adjustments look like from there. But the Army Reserve's always been, much like the Guard, flexible to make sure we can meet the requirements of today's fight, but our force structure will be adjusted to make sure that we're doing the right things to modernize the entire fleet for the total team to get after the future fight and do what's needed. So the Lima models are a good platform. They're steady. The Victor models are amazing. They're really a tremendous asset to bring into the modernized fleet. It's in the distant future for us, but the Mike models, especially in our medevac organizations, have been a fantastic platform, and that's our most highly deployed, lowest bog dwell asset. So we just pushed another medevac unit out the door, and we're looking at accelerating our next medevac deployment. I think they're at 1 to 3 now, based on this deployment. So that's a tough turn for those guys when they expect a 1 to 4 SRM. That's all I have, sir. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments from the field? Anything else that we can help shine a light on or elaborate on while you've got your total Army aviation team up here? All right, silence on the net. Well, thank you for your time, friends. Appreciate your attention this late in the afternoon during the forum. Would like to remind you that your total Army aviation team remains relevant, remains ready. It's in exceptionally high demand, both at home and forward. And First Army remains committed as a partner in readiness. Thanks again.